Nobody wanted to buy the beaten-down horse, until he made his new owner a millionaire. Dawn crept like breath across the frost-glazed grass, turning the Missouri sky a pale lavender before the sun had the nerve to rise. Everything was still, except the wind. It tugged on the shutters of abandoned barns, whispered against splintered fences, and curled around the ankles of a man who hadn't slept right in weeks. Eli Garner, 47, stood by the rail of the old horse auction yard, the collar of his denim jacket turned up against the chill. He didn't come here to buy. Men like him, broke men with rusted trucks and unpaid bills, didn't have business at auctions. But something about this morning tugged at him. The horses were lined up like old soldiers, some restless, others resigned. Their coats shone, their backs proud. One by one they were paraded and praised, and one by one, ranchers scribbled down bids, all except for one. A sway-backed gelding, mud-caked and trembling, stood off to the side like a memory no one wanted to face. His right eye was swollen shut, a chunk of mane missing, ribs visible even under a winter coat. When the auctioneer half-heartedly called him out, "Next's a broken quarter horse. Don't think he's good for much, but maybe glue." The crowd chuckled and turned away. Eli didn't laugh. He stepped forward. He didn't know what it was, the quiet dignity in the horse's stance, or the way he didn't flinch when a soda can clattered to the ground. Something about him said, "I've been hurt before, but I'm still here." Eli raised his hand. "Sold for $5. The auctioneer barked without fanfare, just wanting to move on. The men nearby shook their heads. "Waste of feed," one muttered. "That thing won't make it past Tuesday." Eli didn't answer. He walked over and looked the horse in his one good eye. Then, slow as prayer, he undid his jacket and laid it gently over the animal's back. The gelding flinched, then stood still. That was the first moment, quiet, barely visible, when something in the world shifted. No trumpets, no miracle, just a man and a horse, both beaten down in different ways, finding breath in the same cold wind. Eli led him out of the yard as the sky brightened behind them. He didn't have a name for the horse yet, but he knew this much. Some things you don't save with money. Some things you save because it's the only thing left to do that feels like you. The barn behind Eli's trailer wasn't much. Tin roof, dirt floor, a sagging door that shrieked every time the wind touched it wrong. But it was dry, and it was quiet. That morning, Eli didn't say a word as he led the horse through the barn's crooked entrance and unlatched the pen usually used for storing broken tools. "You'll rest here," he murmured, almost to himself. The gelding didn't move, didn't complain. He simply stood in the center of the pen like he had stood in the auction yard. Still, patient, broken. His breathing was shallow, his legs quivering. Eli found a moth-eaten wool blanket in a trunk by the wall, one his mother had used long ago. He draped it over the horse's back. It looked ridiculous, like putting a bandage on a dying tree, but the gelding let out a long breath. Not relief, just surrender. Eli brought him a tin bowl of oats soaked in warm water. He set it down and stepped back. The horse lowered his head slowly, awkwardly, and began to eat. A soft grunt escaped Eli's throat. It was the closest he'd come to a smile in weeks. He didn't tell the neighbors. Not that they'd ask. Nobody came around since Josie died. Nobody checked on him since the ranch was sold in pieces. But still, he kept the barn door shut, quiet like grief, like shame. Each morning before dawn, he walked the same trail from his trailer to the barn, hands wrapped around a chipped coffee mug. He didn't speak, just watched the gelding eat, or try to stand, or sleep with one leg folded beneath him. By the third morning, Eli noticed something. The horse was watching him too. There was a scar across the gelding's chest, long, uneven, jagged, not from fencing, not from wire. It looked like rope, tight, unforgiving, burned into the skin, and beneath that, smaller marks, scattered, symmetrical, as if someone had once used this creature not just for labor, but for punishment. Eli's fingers tightened around the coffee mug. That day, he didn't just bring oats. He brought a wooden brush and a bucket of warm water, and a silence full of apology. The gelding flinched at first. His left leg stepped back, but Eli waited. Long minutes passed. Then he began to brush, slow, steady strokes, like turning pages of a story no one had ever read aloud. Dust rose in clouds. Mats of dried blood gave way to dull chestnut beneath. Eli didn't speak. He just worked. The next morning, when Eli entered the barn, the gelding lifted his head, took a step forward, and bumped his nose, gently, against Eli's chest. That was it. Just that. A quiet touch that said, "I know you. See me." Eli stood there a long time. Later that night, the wind howled and rattled the gutters, but inside the barn, beneath a fresh pile of hay and the wool blanket folded over his back, the gelding slept with both eyes shut, and Eli, in his trailer, dreamt of hoofbeats on dry earth. For the first time in years, he didn't wake with a headache. It was the 5th morning when the boy came. Thin, maybe 12. Torn sleeves, one sock, dust on his cheeks like he'd run through gravel. He stood outside the gate like a ghost, too young to threaten, too old to be invisible. Eli spotted him from the porch. He didn't shout, just waited. The boy raised his chin. "You buy the horse?" Eli nodded once. The boy looked past him toward the barn. They called him Scrap. Eli didn't answer. The name tasted wrong. "He used to run," the boy said, voice tightening. "Not like the fast kind. Just far away." Eli stepped forward. "You knew him." "My uncle had him." The boy scratched his wrist, eyes not meeting Eli's. "Down by the logging camps, tied him up every night, beat him when he slipped. Said a lazy horse needed reminding." Eli felt his jaw tighten but stayed quiet. One night, Scrap broke the rope, kicked down a trough. I think it was on purpose. My uncle whipped him, said he'd teach him to never run again. A pause. The wind carried dust between them. I tried to feed him once, got smacked for it. Eli's throat burned. The boy's eyes shimmered. I just wanted to see him again. I thought he'd be dead. Eli turned, walked to the barn and pushed the door open. Sunlight carved stripes across the hay. The gelding, Scrap, lifted his head and snorted softly. The boy followed. Quiet steps. He stood just inside the threshold. Scrap looked at him. Long, unmoving stare. Then, unbelievably, he took 2 steps forward and pressed his forehead into the boy's chest. The boy burst into tears. He didn't speak after that. Just sat in the corner, arms around his knees, watching Scrap breathe. Eli brought them both soup that evening, set it down and walked away. He didn't ask questions, but the past had found its way in. The next day, a black truck rumbled down the gravel road and stopped by Eli's gate. The man who stepped out wore a cowboy hat too clean for the dirt, boots too shiny for the land. Logan Price, a name Eli hadn't heard in years, not since the auction barns were honest and the rodeo banners still hung across Main Street. "You got something that was mine," Logan said. Eli stood still. "No brands on him, no tags. You left him to rot. I trained that horse, built him with my hands." "You broke him," Logan spat. "You gonna fight me over a sack of bones?" "No." Eli's voice was low. "I already won." Logan looked past him, toward the barn. "That horse ran once. He'll run again." Eli's eyes didn't blink. "Then maybe he's smarter than the rest of us." Logan didn't press it, just turned and drove off, the tires spitting up gravel like curses. That night, Eli sat in the barn with Scrap and the boy. He didn't speak, just listened, to the rain on the roof, to the soft breath of something healing. He looked at the boy, curled up beside the horse, and saw something in both their faces. Relief. Scrap hadn't just run from pain. He had survived it, quietly, repeatedly. And Eli, who once thought he was just a broken man in a broken town, now realized he was sheltering more than a horse. He was sheltering a history. The wind changed that week. It wasn't colder, just different, slower, heavier, like it was carrying something unsaid. By Friday, word had spread. It started with the mailman, who caught sight of the scarred gelding in the pasture and told the storekeeper. The storekeeper mentioned it to his wife, who whispered it to the church ladies during Thursday cleaning. They'd all heard of the horse, in some way or another. The one that limped through 3 owners, the one that ran wild after the fire at the logging shed, the one they'd all assumed was either dead or sent off to slaughter. "Scrap," they said, not kindly, not cruelly, just as fact. A thing that once was broken. Now he stood in Eli Garner's field, grazing slow beneath a sky smeared with dusk. And the boy, the quiet one who'd stopped speaking since the first night, kept returning, slipping past the ditch in the mornings and curling up by the barn wall as if it were church. Neighbors drove by slower. Trucks paused. Dogs stopped barking. One morning, a group of schoolboys leaned on the fence, watching. They didn't laugh or point, just watched as Eli brushed the horse's flank. And the horse, eyes clear now, ribs fading beneath new weight, stepped carefully in a circle, learning again how to move with trust. The boy whispered a name once. Mercy. Eli turned his head. That's what he should be called. Not Scrap. Not any more. Eli nodded. Mercy, he said, the word falling like a leaf into quiet water. The next Sunday, Pastor Dale knocked gently on Eli's door. Folks been talking, he said, shifting his hat in his hands. They say that horse should have never made it through, and yet, here he is. Eli stood silent. The pastor's voice softened. They're not sure what to make of it. Some say you're wasting your time. Others say, maybe you're not. I'm not, Eli said simply. Dale nodded. That boy, he yours? No. Is he staying? Every day, Eli said. But I never asked why. Dale looked down the road, where the light was just beginning to bleed across the wheat fields. They'll want answers, eventually. I don't owe them, Eli said. Not in anger, but in calm. Not yet. That evening, 3 wild deer appeared on the ridge beyond the pasture. They stood still, ears perked, watching the horse move. Mercy's head lifted, not in alarm but recognition. He stood tall, as if aware he was being seen. The next day, a woman from the paper came with a camera. Eli didn't answer the door. She left a note. The town's watching. The world too. We just want to understand. But understanding wasn't the point. Not yet. That week, the boy didn't show. Eli waited. On the 3rd day, he found a rock tucked near the barn door with a small carved shape. A horse's head, rough but careful. No note, just the symbol. Eli held it in his hand for a long time, then placed it on Mercy's feed box like a prayer. He understood now. People would come. Not to fight, but to witness. But what they saw wasn't just a horse. It was a wound, healing in slow motion. And the world, bruised, weary, hungry for gentleness, had turned its face toward it, and waited. The boy came back at dusk. Eli found him standing near the gate, arms stiff at his sides, cheeks streaked with dried dirt and something older, something like guilt. His shirt was torn at the hem. His voice, when it came, cracked like an old hinge. I lied, he said. Eli didn't move. The boy took one step forward, the barn behind him catching the lavender light of evening. Mercy watched from the pasture, still as a carved statue. My uncle didn't just hit the horse, the boy said. He made me help. Eli's fingers tightened around the fence post. I was scared, the boy went on. He told me if I didn't help, he'd tie me next. So I held the rope. I held the rope while he whipped him. The wind stopped moving. Even the tall grass stilled. I thought if I could just see him one more time, I'd say sorry. But I lied. I didn't try to feed him before. I never did anything kind. I just watched, and I hated myself for it. He dropped to his knees, fists digging into the dirt. I'm not a good person. Silence wrapped around them both. Then Eli stepped forward. He didn't say much, didn't speak like a man offering forgiveness or judgment. He knelt down, knees cracking, and picked something from the boy's pocket. The carved rock, the horse's head. You made this? The boy nodded without lifting his eyes. It took time, Eli said softly. The boy shrugged. I needed to do something. Eli looked at the figure again. It wasn't perfect. The lines were crude, but there was care in it, intention. Do you know what mercy means? Eli asked. The boy shook his head. It's not just about being forgiven. It's about giving grace where none is owed, about letting the wound stay open, so the healing can be real. The boy looked up slowly. You think he knows? The horse? Eli glanced at Mercy, who stood at the edge of the field watching them. The old scars, now softened by sunlight, seemed to fade with each breath. I think he never forgot, Eli said, but he didn't let it define him. Eli took the carved stone and placed it in the boy's palm. Give this to him, he said. Your own hands hurt him once. Let them be the ones to offer peace. The boy stood, trembling, unsure, and walked toward the pasture. Mercy didn't back away. When the boy reached the fence and held out the carving, the horse leaned forward and sniffed his fingers. Then, gently, he touched his nose to the boy's hand. Not forgiveness, recognition, and that was more sacred than either of them had hoped for. Spring crept in quiet that year, like it was trying not to disturb anyone. The mornings were warmer now. Mercy's coat had grown rich and golden. The boy, whose name Eli finally learned was Caleb, began showing up earlier, sometimes before dawn. He carried apples in his pockets, spoke in low, gentle tones. Mercy followed him now, like a shadow stitched to the earth. Eli started fixing the old paddock. He hadn't meant to. One morning he just picked up a hammer, and by sunset, 3 new rails were in. The next week, he started clearing space in the back pasture. Caleb helped, silently, faithfully. Then came the black truck again. It rolled down the dirt road just after noon, trailing a storm of dust behind it. Eli heard the tires before he saw them. Logan Price stepped out. Not alone this time. A man in a brown sheriff's vest walked behind him, clipboard in hand. Logan's smile was tight. "Seems like there's been a mistake," he said. Eli didn't flinch. "That horse?" Logan gestured toward the pasture. "Turns out he was never properly released. I've got paperwork. Sheriff says he's technically still mine." The sheriff didn't speak, just looked tired. "I paid for him," Eli said. "For a broken shell," Logan snapped. "Now he's strong, healthy, worth something. Funny how you only want what's valuable again." Behind them, Mercy trotted closer to the fence. Caleb stood frozen, one hand pressed to the gate. Logan noticed the boy. His eyes narrowed. "You—" He stepped forward, but Eli blocked his path. "I'll make you a deal," Eli said quietly. Logan raised an eyebrow. "Walk into that pasture. If the horse walks to you, you can take him." A pause. Logan laughed. "That's ridiculous." Eli didn't move. So was beating a living creature into obedience. The sheriff shifted his feet. "Let the horse decide," Eli repeated. Logan huffed, dusted off his sleeves, and stepped into the field. Mercy stood still. His ears flicked forward. Logan clicked his tongue, took another step and whistled. Nothing. Mercy turned, not fast, not dramatic, and walked away, slow and sure, toward Caleb. The boy opened the gate, and the horse leaned into him like a tree bending to wind. Logan stood alone in the middle of the pasture. The sheriff folded his clipboard and didn't say a word. Logan left without taking anything. That night, something shifted in town. A note appeared on Eli's porch. No name, just 6 words. "He deserves more than we gave." Then came feed bags, dropped off anonymously. A saddle blanket, hand-woven. A wooden sign, nailed quietly to the pasture fence. Mercy. No one claimed the gestures, but Eli saw them for what they were. Offerings. Not to him, not even to the horse. To the silence they had all once kept. And Caleb, who had once confessed through tears and shame, now stood taller when he walked. Not proud, just grounded, like the earth trusted him again. Eli knew then. The past had come full circle, not erased, not forgotten, faced. And the people, having watched it happen with their own quiet hearts, began to heal in ways they didn't even speak of. By midsummer, the barn no longer smelled of sorrow. The rusted hinges had been oiled, the fences repainted. Mercy, once a patchwork of wounds and silence, now galloped with light in his joints and wind in his breath. He was still gentle, but not out of fear. His strength had returned not in power, but in peace. Caleb came every day now. He didn't ask. He didn't need to. Eli had given him a cot in the back room and an old radio that played soft gospel when the nights got long. Sometimes they talked about nails, saddle straps, or how to repair a gate. But more often, they sat in silence, a kind that didn't need filling. People came by, not in crowds, but in pairs. Children leaned over the fences, wide-eyed. Old men left carrots in sacks. Someone from the mayor's office stopped by and offered to register the horse officially. Eli declined. Mercy belonged to no papers. One morning, Caleb didn't show up at dawn. Eli found him sitting near the back pasture, a letter in hand. His mother, who had once left him with that uncle and disappeared, had written. She was in Colorado now, stable, married again. She wanted to see him, maybe start over. Eli didn't ask questions, just sat beside him on the dry grass. "You think I should go?" Caleb whispered. Eli rubbed his hands together. "Slow. Only if you're ready. Not because you owe her." "I'm not angry anymore," Caleb said. "I just don't want to be invisible again." "You're not." The boy folded the letter and looked out over the field, where Mercy grazed beneath a sky laced with the soft blue of early August. "I think I'll go, just to see." Eli nodded. "Leave when you're ready. The gate'll stay open." A week later, Caleb packed a canvas bag and tied the carved horsehead token into the drawstring. He didn't cry. He didn't linger. Before he left, he walked up to Mercy and pressed his forehead to the horse's cheek. "Thank you," he whispered, "for not giving up on people." Mercy snorted softly, then nudged the boy's chest. That night, Eli sat by the fence long after the crickets began their songs. The sky was vast, quiet, the kind of quiet earned, not inherited. He watched as Mercy stood in the field alone, head lifted, facing the road Caleb had taken. Not mourning, just watching. When morning came, Eli walked to the barn and found something resting on the railing, a folded wool blanket, the same one he'd first laid on Mercy's broken back. Caleb had left it behind, not because he forgot, but because some kindnesses were meant to stay where they began. And so the world, once bent by cruelty, was healed, not by war, but by the steady touch of a boy, a horse, and a man who remembered how to kneel.